Now we're going to talk about some of the short-term issues that led to World War I, and these took place between the years of 1905 and 1913. The other causes that we've identified up to this point are long-term issues that began back around the 1870s up until the very early 1900s. The first short-term cause I'd like to discuss is an issue that happened in the African nation of Morocco. It happened in 1905. And basically the issue involved at first the entente cordiale that had been previously signed between the British and French, which we discussed earlier. This agreement was over colonial issues that both of the nations had. It was not a military agreement. The first application of this agreement in Morocco involved the idea of allowing the French to occupy Morocco. And the British agreed to this. Well, obviously this upset the Germans. They now viewed Britain and France, as they had for quite some time, as their enemy. They did not want to see either country occupying an area in Africa that they were interested in. So the Germans wanted to break up this agreement, this entente cordiale between the British and the French, so that neither could take possession of this area. So the Germans went in and they announced that they were going to support the Sultan of Morocco in resisting French occupation. There was a conference held about this issue, and the Germans tried to basically see if the British would take action. They expected the British to back out of the whole situation and not support the French because it would involve the British military. So they basically called a bluff on the British, and the British responded. The British called the bluff back on the Germans. The British did announce that they would support the French in occupying Morocco, which the Germans did not expect. At this conference, the Germans really didn't have any other country to support them, and now the British and the French were clearly coming out working together. So the Germans basically had to admit defeat. And the results of this crisis you can find on page 19. They're with blue bullets. Basically, Germany had not gained anything that they wanted in North Africa, which was a failure for this whole idea of Weltpolitik, as well as a blow to the pride of the German people. Germany hadn't done anything to the relationship between the British and the French. In fact, they strengthened it because now the entente cordiale did not just mean a relationship between Britain and France over colonial issues. They now started talking about military support for each other. In fact, it says right on page 19 that military talks between France and Britain were initiated in January of 1906. British foreign policy was now directed to support French interests. And also bad for Germany was now the fact that the British saw Germany as a key threat to their interests. So the Germans hadn't really gained anything in this whole issue with Morocco. They definitely lost. The next short-term cause that we're going to discuss was the Bosnian crisis. Bosnia, Herzegovina, was a state in the Balkan area of Europe, and it was located directly to the south of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now, we already know the Balkans was an unstable area when we discussed the Bulgarian crisis, which was one of the long-term causes. This was an area that had already had rebellions and full-scale war between the nationalist groups that lived there and other European powers that were seeking to manipulate the area for their own interests. Now, we already know from our discussion of the Bulgarian crisis that there was a full-scale war between 1877 and 1878 between Russia and Turkey. Russia came out on the winning end, Turkey came out on the losing end. Well, Turkey had been supported by Austria-Hungary, which was why there were some big issues between Austria-Hungary and Russia in the end, because Russia won in that full-scale war. So we know Austria-Hungary had supported Turkey, and Germany had supported Austria-Hungary. So therefore, the Germans and the Russians were not on good terms. Plus, the Germans had fears over Russia joining up with Britain and France in the Triple Entente. They didn't like the idea of being encircled by Britain, France, and Russia. So this led the Germans to want to have even friendlier relationships with Austria-Hungary. Well, Austria-Hungary decided that they wanted to annex the area of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which was directly to their south. This obviously made the Russians mad because the Russians were already at odds with Austria-Hungary, and it also outraged the state of Serbia, which was another small state located in the Balkans right next to Bosnia-Herzegovina. Clearly, this area of the Balkans was unstable, and the Eastern question, as historians call it, rose from this instability. And basically, the gist of the Eastern question was what would happen to the Balkans once the Ottoman Empire was completely out of the picture, and Turkey was the main seat of the Ottoman Empire. Obviously, this was an area that could be manipulated very easily by the stronger European powers. So when Austria-Hungary decided that they wanted to annex Bosnia and Herzegovina, Germany decided that they would support Austria-Hungary in that move if Austria-Hungary had to go to war with Serbia to get the area of Bosnia. The Russians, who were outraged at Austria-Hungary for wanting to annex Bosnia, didn't really have a whole lot of support in this issue from Britain and France, even though they had set up this alliance with them. Britain and France weren't exactly willing to provide a lot of military aid or other aid to Russia in this issue. So therefore, they were kind of forced to recognize Austria-Hungary's annexation of Bosnia-Herzegovina. And obviously this proved that Germany and Austria-Hungary were now bound tightly together. This crisis also had some key results, which you can find on page 20 of your book, bulleted with blue bullets. Pretty much the fact that Russia was humiliated in this crisis. And even though they had, like I said, an agreement set up with the British and French, it kind of proved to the Germans and to the Austro-Hungarians that their alliance was stronger than that of the Triple Entente, which was made up of Russia, Britain, and France. This obviously made Germany and Austria-Hungary feel a little bit more aggressive and bold. Also, Serbia, which was the neighbor country of Bosnia-Herzegovina, was extremely upset by the end of this whole affair. And in their little country, it led to a huge upsurge of nationalist feelings among the Serbian people. In fact, there was an Austrian who basically knew that the Serbian people were full of revenge, but he also knew that that revenge could only be carried out if the Russians went in and helped them. Russia, in the end, even though they had an agreement and an alliance set up with Britain and France, decided that they had to retain their own country's influence and power and stability. They embarked on a massive rearmament program themselves, and they drew a lot closer to the country of Serbia. Meanwhile, Germany had shown that it was willing to encourage Austro-Hungarian expansion instead of encouraging Austria-Hungary to seek a peaceful solution or a diplomatic solution to the crisis. And that just proved Germany's hostile ambitions. Finally, this crisis proved the instability of the Balkan area, which was going to continually degrade until the outbreak of war. After the Bosnian crisis in 1908, another issue broke out in Morocco in 1911. This became known as the Second Moroccan Crisis, or the Agadir Crisis. Agadir was a small port town on Morocco's Atlantic coast. In this particular issue, the French, which had previously in 1905 been given the right to occupy Morocco, now sent in troops to stop a rebellion that had broke out there. Well, the Germans saw this as a clear evidence that the French had been planning all along to completely take over Morocco, not just occupy it. So the Germans sent a gunboat, and their intentions were not to help the people of Morocco. Their real intentions were to try to pressure the French to get something that they wanted from the French. And basically, the area that they wanted was all of the French Congo, which was located in the central portion of the continent of Africa. Well, given that the British and the French were connected to each other, the British were outraged at the Germans' actions here because they knew the Germans' real intention in just trying to gain more territory through manipulation. So this issue turned from being a German-French issue into an Anglo-German issue. The British called the actions by the Germans gunboat diplomacy because it implied the threat of war. Britain was worried that the Germans could succeed in this and capture Agadir, which was that port city, and basically be a threat to British trade and shipping routes. British Chancellor of the Exchequer, David Lloyd George, who would become very influential after World War I, warned the Germans that they needed to stop. and that Britain was not just going to sit by and let the Germans do this and affect their interests. So this confrontation was finally settled when the Germans gave in to the British and accepted a lot less compensation than what they had originally demanded. The Germans ended up getting 2 small strips of territory in the French Congo, definitely not all of French Congo. In this crisis, the British clearly stood up to the Germans, and obviously it humiliated the Germans and kind of showed a little bit of a failure of Weltpolitik. The German people were hostile to this settlement in which Germany only gained 2 small strips of territory, and the agreement between Britain and France was once again strengthened by this issue. In your book on page 20, it also says that naval negotiations between Britain and France began in 1912, and Britain agreed a commitment to the defense of France by 1913. And obviously this issue further increased the tension and hostility between Germany and Great Britain.